All right, today we begin at Shemot, also known as Exodus, chapter 24, verse 7. Literally in English it says, "And he took scroll, the covenant, and he called in ears the people, and he said they, all that spoken Yahweh we make, and we will obey." So it starts off with Vayikach, which is "and he took." It's take. The word is used mostly to take a wife, and so it's from the idea of sticking together like glue, two things adhering to each other like glue, which is where they get the idea of the two become one, because they think alike, they act alike. The longer you're together, the more you become like each other. So he took, what did he take? Sefer. He did not take a book. I got cracked up one day. I got cracked up one day. I was flipping through the channels, and there was this movie on. I didn't know what it was. And so they start talking about the Book of the Dead. And so you've got to go all the way back to Egypt. So we're at least 5,000 years back in history, at least. And they pull up this book that opens this way and has pages in it. I just went into hysterics. It's like, they didn't have books like that back then. You didn't have anything that even remotely looked like what we think of as a book until the first century, and even then it wasn't a book. They were just starting to make more square or oblong, whatever, rectangle pieces of parchment, but they were not yet books. So scroll, you need to think of the word scroll, something that you roll out. It's made out of some. Have I ever seen a scroll made out of parchment? I'm not actually sure I ever have. I've read that they have some, but I've never seen one. I've seen them made out of animal hides. The Jews prefer the lamb skin for the Bible part, but there is one that was written in copper. It's called the Copper Scroll. It was found at the Dead Sea at the Qumran findings. It's a little bitty one, so it's not the whole thing, but they were able to roll it out, and it has part of the Torah in it. Kind of cool. I've seen pictures. I've never actually seen it, but I have seen the pictures of it. So they have one made out of copper. Uh, Less important stuff they would write on deer skins and whatever else they could get their hands on. So I guess it was a lengthy process to make it to where you could actually write on it. And I don't really know. I don't know how that works. But anyway, you need to think of that as something that they roll out because it's a scroll. It's not a book. Then it says Ha Berit, the covenant. It's a covenant, so called from the idea of cutting, since it was a custom in making solemn covenants to pass between the divided parts of the victim. It was of eating together, of a banquet of the Orientals. It's what we call today a barbecue. You get together. Only in their day, they didn't have a butcher. They didn't go down to the store and buy a few steaks to throw on the bobby. Isn't it what they call it, Bobby, or is it Barbie? Never sure. I think it's Bobby, though, from down under. But that's not what they did. They go out and snatch them up a lamb or a goat or a cow or pigeons or whatever, depending on how many people were there. And then they would chop them up and skin them and cut them up and then eventually cook them and everybody would eat. That's how it worked. Seems a little gross to us now because we didn't grow up with it. If you grew up around it, you wouldn't think it was gross. But I'm just saying. The Hebrews were accustomed to eat together when entering into a covenant. That was part of the whole deal. That was part of the deal. You didn't just cut up animals and leave it to some fake god to somehow eat when you weren't looking, you know. So the idea of a covenant was not something that was written on a piece of paper. It was the word comes from the idea of sacrifice, a sacrifice. So you had an old sacrifice, according to Jeremiah, or Yirmiyahu, as his real name is pronounced, and you had what was going to be a Hadashah, a new sacrifice. Keep that in mind. So anyway, you have this covenant. Then it says Va Yikra. Now this is to cry out, to call out. It's used of animals, it's used of people, it's of an outcry, whether it's used of weeping or yelling for help or yelling, cheers of joy, but it's an outcry. This is not me just talking like this. This me talking like this. I'm so excited. Get the idea in your mind here of somebody's having to read it loud. Why? Well, because a lot of people have to hear it, and where they were, as far as we can tell, it was like an amphitheater. So where Moshe was standing and reading this, he still had to read it loud, but it would have spread out like an amphitheater, we think, the sound, to where everybody could hear the outcry of his reading. So he cried out with his voice. Ha'am, the people. He cried out to the people. Well, it says, Be'azne, in the ears of the people. They say it like that. We would say he said it loudly. But the way the Jews said it back then was he cried out in the ears of the people. In other words, he said it loud enough so they could hear it. Then it says, Va Yomru. And literally it's and he said they, because they put the yom in there, which makes it the he or the masculine. But it could also be translated, and it was said by them. And that might make more sense if I put it that way, but literally it's and he said they. But and they said. So this is the people who were within the sound of his voice, the people that heard what he was crying out, the reading of this scroll. They cried out, then they answered, Kol, all, that's everything, totality, we're not going to leave anything out. Kol asher diber, all that was said. And this is diber, it's the setting and role, the ranging in order, to lead, to guide, especially to lead a flock of herds, to rule, to direct a people. So these are not just words that are just thrown out there. These are words that are put in a very specific order, in a very specific manner, that are designed to lead these people to do a certain thing and to not do another thing. You get the point here. So everything that was said by, of course, Yahweh, that's the proper name of God. They use it here. But here's what we need to know. Na'aseh, we will make. Properly, it's to labor, to work about anything, to make, to produce by labor, to manufacture, to fabricate, used of a ship, an altar. It's just stuff that you make. So we're going to make it happen. Everything that God said, all those words that he just laid out before us, everything that was read out of that scroll, we're going to make it happen. And then the next word is Venishma. And we're going to remember this is from Shama. So the Nishma and Nishma is and we will, right? But in Hebrew, to hear somebody, to Shama, is a three-step process. There's three things to it. If any one of these three things is missing, you did not Shama. So first you have to hear it with your physical ears. Well, it just said that he said it in the ears of the people. So we know that the first part is complete. It says to understand with the whole heart and mind. That's the second part. Well, they actually said that. I meant to say something about it, and I skipped right over it. Let me back up here a second. Everything that was spoken, that ranging in the order, the ranging words and the order and all of that, to say that everything that was spoken by Yahweh is their acknowledgement that we understood it. He arranged it in a very specific order, and we get it. We know what we're stepping into here. We understand this covenant. So it's already basically said that they have part number two. They've heard it with their ears. They've understood it with their heart and their mind. And remember, in the biblical period, the heart, the mind, the soul, they were not three different things. They were three different words for the one and only thing. The heart, the mind, the soul were all one thing. So if your heart said yes, your mind said no, you were suffering from schizophrenia. That concept of 3 points and a funny dog joke did not exist to these people 5,000 years ago. But there was a third piece to this. You had to act upon it, on what you've heard and you've understood. So the indication is you'll obey, right? Because if you're going to act, if God said do this, you're saying we're going to do it. If He said don't do this, you're saying we won't do this. That's the underlying current of this word. Now, it doesn't make any difference on whether you heard or not. You can actually disobey because you heard it with your ears, you understood it with your whole heart. Now, if you don't obey it, you have acted upon it. You've said, we don't have to live by the law anymore. It passed away and we live by grace, right? That's the Christian thing now. They think that it's been this way from the beginning, but no, it's only been this way since the 1900s in Christianity. But the Old Testament passed away and the New Testament took its place. Now that part's kind of been played with over the centuries, the last 2 centuries in particular. But just coming right out and saying that we don't live by the law, we live by grace, that's actually something that started in the early 1900s. I was born in the 1900s. You know what I'm saying? This is new in history. But so if you're going down that route, you've heard you say you know you have a covenant with God, so you're indicating here that you heard it, you understood it, but you're not going to obey it. That would fit here because you're acting upon it by not doing what, if it says the Shabbat is on Saturday and you say, no, we're going to worship our Lord on Sunday, you have just committed a sin because Torah rebellion is sin. It's the definition of sin. You can even find that in the New Testament, and I think every Jew needs to learn this. 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. Everyone who commits sin is also in rebellion of the Torah, because sin is Torah rebellion. It's the best description of what Torah rebellion is and is not that has ever been given in any document that I know of, because it makes it very precise. If God said do it and you don't, that's sin. If God said don't do it and you do, that's sin. Pure and simple. That's all you have to do. So it also makes understanding what it is not very easy. Okay, well, I'm offended by this. Does the Torah say it's wrong? Well, no. Well, then it's not sin. Doesn't make any difference how offended we are. If the Torah doesn't identify it as don't do it or do it, then it's not sin. Everyone who commits sin is also in rebellion of the Torah, because sin is Torah rebellion. 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. Every Jew ought to learn it. Because when the Christians start saying we live by grace and not by the law, you need to point that out to them. Tell them, go look at your own book, see what it says. Because you can't live by grace and not the law, and not violate what that just said. And so that's what I'm saying here. The reason why the wages of sin is death, as they say in the New Testament, is right here. You heard it with your ears, at least you're saying you did. You say you understood it with your heart and mind, you're saying you did, and you're rejecting it. You're disobeying it. So you knew. That makes you guilty. At least if you really did hear it, understand it, and disobey it. Because the idea here is that you hear it, you understand it, and you obey it. That's what's supposed to happen. So the translation becomes, and he took the scroll of the covenant, and he proclaimed in the ears of the people, and they said, all that Yahweh has spoken, we will make, and we will obey. So what are we making here? We're going to make it happen, I guess I should have said, to make it more clearly. All that Yahweh has spoken, we will make it happen, and we will obey. because sometimes you don't get to make it happen quite the way you think you ought to. In Russia, a few hundred years ago, it was illegal for Jews to wear fringe on their outer garment as commanded by God. So they put it on their inner garment. Now that that law is gone, they're still wearing it on the inner garment because tradition. You know what I'm saying, right? Let's not go back to we will make it happen. Let's just go over here to the we will obey. Well, but what you're obeying is not right. But they found a way to make it happen. And when they did that initially, because it was made against the law, and they found a way to wear their fringe, in spite of the law, they were making it happen, and they were in obedience. But once that law passed from them, and they continued not to do it, not to wear it on the outer garment, as it is stated, outer garment, well, now they went into the we won't make it happen and we won't obey either one. You follow what I'm saying? There's a problem here with tradition when it violates God's law. The tradition came about because they were doing God's law by making it happen. They found a way to get around it, to get around not being allowed to follow God's law and still kind of follow God's law, though technically they weren't following it, wearing it on the inside, but they were looking for some way to make it happen. That's why I have a problem with the whole there's no temple priest, we can't blah blah blah. Well, most of the law, all of the law that was given when there was no temple. And for us to say there's no temple and no temple priest, thus we don't have to do what it said, or we can't do what it said, is how they'll say it. They won't say we won't, or that's our ticket out. No, they just say we can't. Wait a minute. What, God slapped himself on the forehead in the 70 AD and said, "Wow, I didn't see that coming, man. They got me. They got me twice, kind of 2.5 times." No, God knew that the temple was going to be destroyed, and he never once said, "Well, when the temple's destroyed, you don't have to follow my law anymore. You can go off and be Gentiles." No, that's not in there. And believe me, God knew the temple was going to be destroyed. Anyway, of the word scroll of the covenant, again, as spoken last week, as talked about last week, Rashi defines, as do I, pretty much everything God said as being in the scroll. Everything. The 10 Devarim, because that's the overview, and then what they call the 613 mitzvot, which, by the way, there's way more than 613. It's not my fault that Maimonides left a bunch out and that he repeated a bunch. That's not my fault. The whole 613 was because somebody was trying to make what they believed, trying to make the Bible line up with what they believed. The truth is, there are way more than 613. Way more. There's just a bunch left out. Anywho, everything, all of it, everything that God said, it was in that scroll. Of the words, we will hear and we will obey, Casuto said that we will do and hear equals we will do and obey. Well, okay, I don't know that I disagree with it, but I don't like it because it's like we're making the word asa mean exactly the same as shama, and they don't. Would have been different if it would have said we will hear and we will hear. That would have had a completely different feel to it. If it would have said we will do and we will do, that would have had this idea. If it would have been asa twice, I would have completely agreed with Casuto. But I'm not exactly in disagreement either. Rashbam added that the Jews would do everything God already said and everything he would say in the future and to the end of time. His statement goes against the teaching that Jews no longer have to obey God's voice because the temple is destroyed. You follow that? He said that it was going to go on for all eternity. I agree with that. But if he's right, and if I'm right agreeing with him, then that's in contradiction to the teaching that we no longer can obey certain laws because the temple is destroyed. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this or not, but there was no tabernacle, nor was there a temple when God made these laws, or when he gave them, right? They weren't in the temple when Moshe did it. They weren't in the tabernacle when Moshe read this stuff. Neither one of those two places were built. God had to lay out the law, and then after he laid out the law, then he laid out the instructions for the tabernacle, right? And the temple didn't come for a long time. That's David and Shlomo. Anyway, let's move on to verse 8. Literally it says, and he took Moshe, and Moshe took the blood, and he scattered upon the people. And he said, behold, blood the covenant that cut Yahweh with you upon all the words the these. You can figure that one out yourself, right? So vayikach. So and he took to it. We've already had this word. That's the sticking together word. So he grabbed it. It's in his hand, right? So he took. What did he take? Moshe took et. So that's your arrow pointing at something. Hadam. So now he took the blood. First he took a sefer. He took a scroll and rolled it out, and he read it to the people. And they said, we're going to make it happen, and we're going to obey. We are going to obey. That's their promise. We're not going to find a reason not to. We're going to find a way to. That's the promise. So now he takes the blood. And then it says, Vayis roch, and he scattered that blood. If you imagine somebody taking a paintbrush and dipping it in paint and then slinging it, you can probably imagine what was taking place here, because he would have dipped it in the bowl. It would have been made up, I don't know, dry things such as dust, cinders, live coals, more often liquid things to sprinkle, such as water. That doesn't really explain what he dipped here. But I think we've already had that word where it's made up of the feathers and the different things. It's all tied together and you dip it in there. So it's basically going to have the same effect as a paintbrush. And so he's scattering this, the word all, which means on. So he's scattering it on ha'am, the people. That's all the people that were within the sound of his voice. Now there's argument about that, but this is what it says, the people. Now that doesn't mean it was, let's say there were 50,000 people there. We don't know what the exact number is, but let's say it's 50,000. It can mean, and the word is saying here, that all 50,000 were sprinkled with this blood. And certainly there was enough blood for all that from the sound of it, right? But it doesn't give the exact number of cattle, and it doesn't give the exact number of people, though that can be argued. So we don't know whether all the people did it, because you could have sprayed it on the leaders of the people who represented the people in their time. That would have been acceptable. If the leaders were sprinkled, then all of the people were sprinkled. That's not what it says, but that is quite possible, because that's the way it worked in their world. Then it says, Vayomer, and he said. So he's sprinkling it, and he's saying, Hine. Now remember, this is the word we say, behold, but this is, he's pointing at something. He's trying to get your attention on something. And then what's he say? Dam, the blood. So he's wanting your attention on the blood that he's sprinkling on the people. Ha-berit, the covenant. So called from the idea of cutting. Remember, we've already had this word. It's from the idea of cutting and eating together of the animals and all of that. This is asher karat, that was cut. The covenant that was cut. Now we see that as two things. One is the covenant, one is the cutting of the covenant. No, this is two different words that mean exactly the same thing. The covenant that was cut. I don't know if I should say they mean exactly the same thing. They really don't. But in this case, we're talking about the cutting, and the cutting itself is the covenant, right? Because the words written on the piece of paper, that's the witness of the covenant. The actual covenant is the cutting, the cooking, and the eating of the covenant to show our agreement to the entering into the covenant. That's all conglomerated together as the same thing. So the covenant that was cut, Yahweh, but that Yahweh cut imachem, with you. It's plural, so it's all of you. All of you. God did this. It says on, all, the word all, kol, that's all, totality, everything, ha, debarim. Now we've already had this debar, the words, the discourse, the promises, the precepts, the edicts, the royal mandates. I don't know if I went that far into it a while ago, but those are the words. Is that the word we had? I don't remember now. Anyway, this is the word. All of these words, everything that was spoken, everything that's written down, all of the precepts, the edicts, the mandates, or whatever, all of this stuff, all of those words, ha'eleh, these. Sometimes they say these, sometimes they say these. You can go either way in Hebrew. So your translation, and Moshe took the blood and scattered it on the people. And he said, behold, the blood of the covenant that Yahweh cut with you. And then I added based in squiggly letters because it helps the sentence make sense. That Yahweh cut with you based on all these words. Is that the right word? Should I say something other than based?
My Bible says in accordance.
In accordance to, those words aren't there, but in accordance to is probably better than based. In accordance to all these words. Because it is the absolute witness of those words, the written covenant. Of the words of the people, even Ezra said that the blood was only sprinkled on the elders because they represented the people, as I was saying earlier. It is possible. Now, the text does not actually say that, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen this way. It doesn't mean that it did, but it doesn't mean that it didn't. The Sadia said it was all the people, all of them. The problem here is that some find it hard to believe that that much blood could have been sprinkled. It would have coagulated in the bowls unless they were vibrating or spinning somehow. Think about what happens to blood if you don't. It's why when they put them in those little machines, it spins them around. It's to keep it from thickening. Coagulation is what it's called technically, but it thickens up like pudding, right? And I guess if it goes long enough, it'll dry completely hard. And that happens pretty quick with blood. And that's why they're like, oh, it's not possible. It had to have been just the elders. Well, I don't know. Who knows that they weren't sitting on a spinny roundy thing and oxen weren't. In Hebrew, they don't have to give you those details. There's no, everybody did it the same way at the time. They would have not even thought to give the details. It'd be just like me telling you when we close down today, get in your cars and go to the store and spend money, right? I don't have to tell you how to get in your car. I don't tell you how to start your car and actually drive it. I don't have to tell you that you have to have a license to drive it and insurance. I don't have to tell you where the store is or how to get there. I don't have to tell you what to do when you get to the store, right? Because everybody in our time knows. That's why the details are often not there. Now, you go 5,000 years into the future, somebody may not know how that works out, right? That's all I'm saying about that. So we don't know what happened. We don't know if the whole of the people got sprinkled. And when it says Moshe did it, it doesn't mean that he did it personally. It could be that Moshe and the 70 elders, everybody had a paintbrush, dipping it in that blood and sprinkling it on all the people, all at this, and even that would have been hard to pull off. So the idea that just the 70 were sprinkled is actually more likely, but we don't know. Verse 9, it literally would say, and he ascended Moshe and Aharon, Nadav and Avihu, and 70 from elders Yisrael. So it says, Vaya'al, which is literally, and he ascended. So he went up, up the hill, if you will, up the mountain. Moshe did it. Then it says, the Ha'aron, and so that's the guy they call Aaron. So it was Moshe went up And Aharon, his brother, Aaron, went up. It says Nadav, and it says Va, and so Nadav and Abihu, they're included in the going up. Veshivim and 70 Mizikne, 70 from the elders. So it's not the 70 elders, it's 70 old people from among the old people went up. Then it says from the 70 elders were from Israel. So as I was pointing out last week, that tells you that in the mixed multitude, only the 12 tribes were included in this. So they didn't have anybody from Africa going up there. You didn't have people from, because they had tribes from Africa that would have been there. They would have had tribes from all over the Middle East would have been there, and those people were not represented in the 70. The 70 represented the 12 tribes of Israel, and we have to know that. So does that mean they were left out? Well, no, they would have, if you were from, let's say you're from Italy, and somehow you wound up in Egypt during the captivity, and you were there when they left, you would have been of the mixed multitude. But you wouldn't have been one of the from the 12 tribes, correct? That you wouldn't have. But if you converted to Judaism, somebody would have taken you in, and from that tribe, your children would have been. Let's say some Levite takes you in under his wing, which probably wouldn't have happened back then. But so let's use Simeon. So you're the tribe of Simeon. They take you in, and then your children become the descendants of Simeon eventually. Although that could be arguable, I think that's probably reasonable. So, but it was just the 12 tribes at this particular moment, because they were the ones that were given the promise, not the whole world, but just the 12 tribes. So your translation then is, and Moshe ascended, and Aharon, Nadav, Abihu, and the 70 elders, or 70 elders from Israel. Verse 10. Literally it says, and saw they gods, because it's, remember, he's alive, so they say it in plural, not because there's more than one, but because he's alive. And saw they gods, Yisrael, and under feet his, as work pavement, the sapphire, and as body, the skies to purity. Now, this one could be a little confusing if you don't know a few things. It says, Va yiru, and saw they, so and they saw. It's from the word to see. It's a set of a king's ministers who are received in his presence. From that idea of the scepter, if it goes one way, they take you out and kill you. If it goes the other way, they bring you in. You get to be in the presence. To see the face of God, they use it that way. To see is used for to enjoy the light to live. And that's that whole, as I've already said, which makes this problematic for some, and we'll talk about that. To look upon, to view, to be pleased with the sight as the eye lingers on objects of pleasure. So, it's like staring at something. There's a note here. It says the Hebrews use of verbs of seeing, of those things also which are not perceived by the eyes, but by other senses, as by hearing, touch, feeling. So you feel something, and someone's telling you it's got a really rough texture, and so you feel the texture and say, yeah, I see. Right? We do things like that, and that's what they mean. Oh, it has a real pungent smell, so you sniff it. Yeah, I see what you're saying. They did the same thing with this word. That's what we're saying. So B, it's of those things which are perceived, felt, and enjoyed by the mind. So when someone's trying to explain something to you and you have a little bit of trouble understanding, and they say, well, but if I say it this way, and do you see? Oh, I see, I get it. You perceive it with the mind now. You understand it. The C of things which we perceive with the mind or heart, hence to perceive, to understand, to learn, to know. That sounds just like B to me. Anyway, the next word is et. That doesn't have a meaning. It's just a pointer. And so it's pointing to what? Elohe. That's God's in plural. It's actually the plural of majesty. They use it of God, but it really it's the plural of majesty. Yeah, I'm not going to go through all the God stuff this time. I go through that quite often. So it's the God they saw or perceived or understood in their mind something, the God of Yisrael. So now they're either seeing with their eyeballs or they're understanding, they're perceiving something in their mind. The God of Yisrael. Then it says Vetahat. So the ve is and then tahat, under, beneath, below, raglav. Well, that's his feet, his literally, but under his feet. Under his feet. Ke ma'aseh. That's a work, a noun of action of the verb. Remember, verbs and nouns don't exactly exist in biblical Hebrew. That's an English thing, right? So we take things that we see as a noun and call them a noun, and we take things we see as a verb and call them a verb. But every once in a while, you have a noun that's an action word. I'm just saying, because it doesn't actually exist in biblical Hebrew, though I'm sure it does in modern. So you have a noun of action, but it's of anyone who makes or does something. It's of a deed, an action that is taken by a human being. Then it says, leave note. So they're seeing something that was made under his feet. It was an action was taken, something was made, leave note. And they're calling it a brick pavement. This is pavement that's made of bricks. It can be pavement that's made of just about anything, actually. But it's the idea here is burnt tiles or cooked brick, right? So they're seeing this pavement under his feet, ha sipir. That's where you get the word sapphire. The sapphire. They saw gems under his feet. Uche et zem. And as body, that's the word for bone, so called from its firmness and strength, body, bodily, the form. So under his feet was this pavement, and they said that the form that they saw, Ha Shamayim, was as like it was the skies. It was like a cloud. It was like looking, let's say you look at a cloud, and I think about all the things you see in clouds. I once saw Abraham Lincoln. The cloud just had I saw it on TV. I mean, I didn't see it personally, but the picture someone took, it really did look like a profile of Abraham Lincoln. So they're kind of get that in your mind. They're not seeing a physical body, are they? They're saying what the form that they saw was like the heavens, because they didn't really know how to say it. This is La Tohar. It was the brightness, it was majestic, it was splendor. Look up in the sky and you see the splendor and the majesty, right? So it's very hard to nail down description of God, right? It didn't say we saw his head and his eyes were like fire and his ears were like radar. Was that like a 57 Chevy with the doors open driving down the road? Some of it anyway. They didn't give that kind of description. They're describing some kind of heavenly body that they perceived that it was something like that, but it's not really telling you that they saw anything, is it? So your translation is, and they saw the God of Yisrael, and under his feet or maybe I should say, and they perceived the God of Yisrael, and under his feet as a paved work of sapphire, and the body of the heavens, or I should say, in body glorious like heaven. Yeah, let's say it that way. So, of the words, they saw the God of Yisrael. Now, Rashi felt that the nobles saw God and should have died, because you can't see God and die. But God didn't want to, Rashi goes on, but God didn't want to upset all the people, so he let them live. just kick me. He felt that way because, of course, the Bible says you can't see God and die, or and live. Yeah, yeah, I said it wrong. But you get what I'm saying. Everything's all literal to him. He doesn't get what's going on here. He doesn't understand the perception part of seeing. Even Ezra, not Maimonides, and the Sephono believe the nobles saw a prophetic vision because, again, they're hung up on this. You can't see God and live, but they perceive something, right? And they're kind of closer, if you will, and they perceive the God of Israel, and under his feet as a paved work of sapphire, and the body as the purity of the heavens, right? So you could say that, and they're not exactly wrong, are they? Casuto pointed out that corporal, did I say that right? Or of the physical body, corporal comparisons, so comparisons of the physical body of God are almost non-existent in the Torah. He went on to argue that since the text did not say the proper name of God, or Yahweh, and because it used the generic word for God, Elohim, or Elohe in this case, it can denote any kind of divine phenomenon. And so basically what he did was make up a new grammar rule to make it okay that they saw God. This is not a Hebrew grammar rule. It is something he made up. But he did point out that the text did not describe a physical likeness, but rather only spoke of what was under God's feet. Well, not so fast. Or else did the nobles enter into God's presence? Do we not know the basic meaning of the first word in the verse? To see the face of a king instead of his ministers. The Hebrews use that which are, of perception. Anyway, you guys get what I'm saying. I hope I don't sound all mean and ugly. I feel like that's the way it came across. Verse 11. And two nobles' children Yisrael, not Shalach, hand he, and he saw they, the gods, and ate they, and drank they. Not sure why I left the Hebrew word in there, but we'll figure it out. It says Ve'el and two. This is not the word El for God, but it's the word of turning this way and turning that way. So, and to Atzile, and to the nobles, properly deep-rooted, striking deep roots into the earth, hence metaphorically sprung up from an ancient and noble stock. That's the idea behind it. So these are the leaders of the people. These are the people that are direct descendants of the 12 tribes. That's why they're called nobles. B'nai, that's of the children, of Yisrael. Again, not the mixed multitude, just the children of Yisrael. Then it says, Lo Shalak. Shalak, to send anyone to do anything, to send anything to anyone. Of the person sent, this is in PL, to send, as God to send on anyone a plague or a calamity. Anyway, so God did not send out what? Yado, his hand. So when God walked by, he didn't send out his hand to shake, he didn't reach out to shake everybody's hand, right? He didn't salute them. Or should it be like this? You all see what I'm doing? Right. No, you got to know this is an idiom, right? So God didn't stretch out his hand to the nobles. Then it says, Vayechezu. And he saw they, so and they saw, metaphorically, it's to perceive. It's not really to look. Et ha-Elohim, the gods. Again, the word is used in plural because it's a living God and not a statue that has no life. Vayochlu, and they ate. They ate food. What's going on here? They're making a covenant. Shouldn't they be eating? Of course they should. That's the whole point in cutting up the animals. It's not to feed God blood. It's not to appease him for his anger. It's none of those things. It's so the people can eat. Then it's vayishtu, and they drank. They ate and they drank because that's what you do in a covenant. All right, so the translation, and to the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not acknowledge them. He did not send forth his hand. He did not acknowledge them. And they saw God, they perceived God, and ate and drank. Because it's already explained to you that they perceived God, right? So it says it again. Again, they did not actually see God and were not thus guilty of death, thus making God a liar who said you cannot see him and die. Rather, from the Hebrew word, see him and live. I keep doing that. I do apologize. I am not doing it on purpose. Rather, from the Hebrew word, we know that it was to perceive. They felt the presence of God. To perceive God is to understand what you're doing. In entering into a covenant, you eat and you drink. You're showing that you understand. But it's also to be in the presence of God, right? I'm surprised they didn't have more information on that one. 13 minutes, and that's a big one. Let me see if I can get this one in. So verse 12, literally it says, and he said, Yahweh to Moshe, ascend to me, the mountain, and be there, and I will give her to you, two tablets, the stone, it's T-O, not T-W-O, two tablets, the stone, and the Torah, and the commandments that written me to direct them. Kind of proves what I said about all the words, doesn't it? Vayomer, and he said. The primary signification is to bear forth, hence to bring light to the subject, to shed light on the subject. That's and he said. So he's going to make something understood. Who's the he? Yahweh. It's using the proper name of God. Then it says El, which that's the turn of the face this way. So he said to Moshe. So and God brought something to light to Moshe. Aleh, ascend, go up, come up. Eli, to me. Come up to me, hara, the mountain. So come up to me on the mountain, veye, and be. So come up to me on the mountain and hang out, and just be there. Then it says sham, which is the word there. So and be there and hang out there, just get up there. Ve'etina, and I will give her. It's literally the feminine ending. I will give her. I will cause you to receive. I'm going to make something and I'm going to place it in your hands. I'm going to cause you to have it. Lecha, I'm going to cause to you to have it. Et what? Luchot. That's tablets. I'm going to cause you to have the tablets. And they're made of stone. A stone on which anything was carved or inscribed. The tables of the covenant. They can be made of wood. I'm not sure why they would use this for the deck of a ship. But they do talk about the tables of the heart, the Torah written on the tables of your heart, if you will. They're using this same word that way, but we're talking literally here about the stone tablets because the next thing it says is ha'eben, stone. So I'm going to make stone tablets, and he's going to place them in the hands of Moshe. Then what's going to be on those tablets? The HaTorah, the instruction, the doctrine. Torah is not the word for law. I used to do that. When I would travel and teach, I would say, who wants to answer this trick question? I always let them know it was a trick question. And of course, everybody in the room, me. All right. What is the Hebrew word for law? Every hand in the room goes up. Torah, Torah, Torah. I told you it was a trick question. Mishpat, uh, mitzvot, those are the words for law. Torah is instruction. It's from the word yara. It's to teach, to instruct. So then it says veha mitzvah. So you have the instruction. Now you have the commandments. There's instruction and there's commandments. Asher katati, that I have written, to write, to direct, to inscribe, to decree. So this is coming from God. Lehorotam, to direct them. The Torah was put here to direct the people. That's all it says. So then the translation is, I can't believe I got through it that fast. And Yahweh said to Moshe, ascend to me on the mountain and be there. I will give you the tablets of stone and the Torah and the commandments which I have written to direct them. Which I have written. Of those words, Rashi, apparently not able to understand this verse, concluded that the 613 laws were somehow implied in the 10 commandments. He couldn't think of a single place in Scripture that said God wrote all of it. Thus, he concluded that it was implied. Had he better understood Hebrew, he would have understood that this verse says that God wrote all of it. It was right there in the verse, but he didn't get it. I don't know if you guys follow that, but I'm going to have to call it quits here. I've run out of time. Shalom, shalom, y'all.